In our previous video, we talked about passive representation, the extent to which the public sector workforce mirrors society. But what if representation isn't just about who gets a seat at the table, but what they do once they're there instead? This is where the idea of active representative bureaucracy comes in. It's not just about having a public sector that looks like the community. It's about using that diversity to make decisions that truly serve it. Returning to the first video in this series, passive representation can be considered the starting point. It's when the demographics of government intentionally mirror society. Taking this one step further, active representation is built on the idea that background and identity are what guide action. So when civil servants' identities align with society, they'll shape government policy and behavior in ways that actually serve the public, or the socio-demographic segments of that public. In other words, passive representation is presence, while active representation is purpose. It's when administrators use their understanding of their communities to act by advocating or making public policy more responsive to those needs. Over the next few minutes, we'll explore how representation turns into action. We'll look at what active representative bureaucracy means, see how it works in practice through real-life examples, from policing to social services. We'll then unpack what helps it succeed, where it runs into challenges, and why it ultimately matters for fair and responsive government. This idea isn't just theoretical. Back in the 1970s, Professor Kenneth Meyer showed that female bureaucrats were more likely than men to champion programs that benefit women overall. Later studies backed that up. Women in child support offices often achieved better outcomes for female clients, and female officers tend to actively represent the interests of all victims, regardless of gender. But it doesn't just stop at gender. In England and Wales, a study found that as police departments became more diverse, officers of all backgrounds, not just minority ones, began acting more fairly and ethically. Greater representation improved conduct across the force. When representation turns into action, the effects ripple outward. Inside organizations, active representation has shown to break down barriers between employees by introducing and destigmatizing minority groups. It can also help improve decision-making and raise internal job satisfaction. Outside, it builds trust, showing citizens that government doesn't just speak for them, it acts for them. But for active representation to work, a few things have to line up. First, discretion. Civil servants need room to make judgment calls, to interpret and apply policies based on real experience, instead of following explicit guidance from higher-ups. Second, fit. When someone's personal experiences align with their agency's mission, say, a veteran working in Veterans Affairs, that connection has been shown to deepen impact. Third, culture. In organizations and agencies where trust and collaboration outweigh hierarchy, representation has space to thrive. Staff need to feel comfortable and empowered to act without fear of backlash. And finally, leadership. When both elected and appointed leaders actively support diversity and inclusion, it sends a signal that representation isn't for show. Instead, it's a conscientious strategy choice. Of course, it's not simple. Active representation is harder to measure than passive representation, and it assumes that identity automatically shapes behavior. But real life is actually messier. People's actions are influenced by colleagues, workplace culture, and institutional norms, not just personal background. There are also ethical debates. Some critics worry that focusing on underrepresented voices might come at the expense of majority groups. But studies don't back that up. In fact, researcher Meyer and his colleagues found the opposite. Diversity didn't harm majority interests. Instead, it raised fairness and performance across the system. However, every system is different. In agencies with a culture of strict hierarchy or limited flexibility, public servants might want to advocate for inclusion but simply can't. Research has found that street-level bureaucrats often have the least discretion to act as compared to more senior civil servants. That's why context matters. The path to active representation looks different depending on how much freedom the system gives its staff. So here's the idea. Representation without action isn't enough. Active representative bureaucracy asks who's in the room, yes, but also what are they empowered to do? Are they doing it? When diversity turns into action, governments don't just look more like their citizens, they actually serve them better. This video is a part of a series produced by the Radar Project, Renewing Administration Through Democratic Anchorage Reforms, a consortium of European universities working to enhance the democratic governance of public services and administrations by strengthening legitimacy through democratic anchorage, new narratives, and education.